From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Putting out the fire with a little homegrown power.
Kind of nice to know something that I grow is being used on the fire ground.
See how this soy-based fire suppressant works when put to the test. The cattle market pulls back.
Uncertainty is not helpful to the market.
As the industry finally gets answers about a mysterious cow illness in the Southern Plains.
There's been 4 dairies that have had samples test positive for avian influenza.
But where do we go from here? The latest right now on AgDay.
AgDay, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when the testing grounds meet the proving grounds. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. We now know what is making several dairy cows sick in the Southern Plains, and now there are efforts to try and control it. As we first told you yesterday morning, public health officials have determined the cattle were sickened with highly pathogenic avian influenza, commonly known as bird flu. Farm Journal's Tyne Morgan is continuing to dig into this with a look at how experts were able to piece this mystery together.
There's been 4 dairies that have had samples test positive for avian influenza.
Dr. Fred Gingrich is the executive director of the American Association of Bovine Practitioners, the largest cattle veterinary association in the U.S. Gingrich says 3 of the positive samples were from unpasteurized milk samples in Kansas and Texas.
We have lactating dairy cattle, and primarily lactation 2 and over is what's been reported. There have not been any reports thus far of it in young stock heifers, and we have also not had any reports in any beef herds.
Gingrich says the reported symptoms in Texas, Kansas, and New Mexico include cows simply quit eating, and milk production declines about 20% for at least 3 weeks. After that, the herd returns to 95 to 97% of previous production. Other symptoms previously reported in some herds also include mastitis and colostrum like milk.
Right now, the main symptoms appear to be the same. What we don't know, since this is the first time that avian influenza has been identified in a cow, we don't know if the symptoms are directly tied to the virus. What we know is that we have some symptoms, we have a disease event, and we have identified a virus in 4 samples. So now the investigation is ongoing, trying to tie it all together.
Avian influenza has taken a toll on the U.S. poultry industry, with more than 80 million birds in the U.S. depopulated to control the disease in commercial poultry flocks. But so far in dairy, it's different.
In cattle, mortalities or cattle deaths appear to be 0. We don't have any reports of cattle directly dying from this disease.
As the industry continues to search for answers, including the scope of the illness today, Gingrich says AABP is diligently working to help find answers.
Well, food safety is an incredible part of what a cattle veterinarian does. We want to ensure that the products that we work with our farmers are safe to eat, safe to drink. I'm a consumer of beef and dairy products every day. The good news is that this virus, like many viruses, is destroyed by heat. And so cooking beef to the appropriate temperature or only consuming pasteurized milk remains safe.
All right, thanks, Tyne. Now, Gingrich's advice for dairy producers is if you notice a sudden drop in appetite or milk production, immediately call your veterinarian. And if you're a veterinarian, he advises them to be aggressive with diagnostics. He says the investigation is ongoing and producers and vets need to continue to work with diagnostic labs and state animal health officials on this topic. Now again, USDA wants to emphasize there is no concern about the safety of the commercial milk supply or that this poses a risk to consumer health. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association also putting out a statement about it, saying at present HPAI hasn't been detected in beef cattle and that meat remains safe to consume. But the cattle market reacted negatively to the news on Tuesday, with feeder cattle down more than $5 on the May contract at one point.
Why do we care about that with cattle futures? Well, the worry is that this would increase the cull rate in dairy cows. And if these cows are sick, that's what they're trying to do, trying to get them slaughtered because it's safe to go into the consumption, right? Would that increase, the amount of beef that we have to move through the channels? Now, one would think we could handle that little blip, that bump, but I've been around long enough to know that when it comes to cattle, uncertainty is not helpful to the markets.
Koyma also says live and feeder cattle futures continue to react to a bearish cattle on feed report that said placements in Nebraska were at 116%, which is a record high, and at 118% in Iowa. Another concern, the impact this could have on trade. A group of dairy trade organizations releasing a joint statement urging U.S. trading partners to avoid placing bans on American dairy products in response. The International Dairy Foods Association, the National Milk Producers Federation, the U.S. Dairy Export Council, and Dairy Management among the groups that signed on to the statement, saying, quote, "It is essential that trading partners do not impose bans or restrictions on the international trade of dairy commodities in response to these and future notifications, and rely on the science-based food safety steps taken in U.S. dairy processing, namely pasteurization, in preserving market access," end quote. The U.S. dairy exports were valued at $8.11 billion in 2023, the second largest value on record. And we're going to continue following this story both online and on air. For the latest 24 hours a day, make sure to check out agweb.com. Another developing story this morning, vessel traffic in and out of the Port of Baltimore is suspended until further notice after a cargo ship hit a bridge, causing it to collapse into a river. The ship colliding with Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge, causing it to collapse into the Patapsco River. Video shows the ship's lights flickering twice before veering off course and crashing after it's reported the crew radioed the ship lost power. Now, the collapse plunged a construction crew and several vehicles into the dangerously cold waters. Rescuers pulled out 2 people, but 6 others were missing. Mike Steenhoek, the executive director at the Soy Transportation Coalition, talking to Chip Flory on AgriTalk about how much ag trade goes through the Port of Baltimore.
Soybean exports, about 200,000 is a good rough number of metric tons of soybeans are exported from the Port of Baltimore. That's in via containers. They really don't have bulk exports to speak of. Well, you compare that to the Mississippi Gulf region near New Orleans, 35 million metric tons of soybean exports in that region. So that's our number one export region. So it doesn't accommodate a lot in terms of agricultural exports. There's some soybean imports that actually occur to the Port of Baltimore.
While the Port of Baltimore is not a significant port for soybeans and grain, it is a significant location for the broader economy as the leading port for the import and export of cars and light trucks. Some areas that really needed the moisture have seen it lately in the form of snow. Meteorologist Martin Lormore joins us with the very latest.
Yeah, we're still watching for a lot of that snow to move across the northern plains. Places in the Dakotas, Minnesota have seen more snow in this past 2-week time frame than they've seen for the entirety of winter. So yeah, we've been catching up on a lot of lost moisture in the northern plains and out toward the western Great Lakes. You're seeing this continuing to move its way out as we head throughout the rest of that Thursday morning, and through the rest of our Thursday we'll continue to see that moving through. But another system already lining itself up in the Pacific Northwest. Going to start seeing disturbances in the form of more snow heading once again in the northern plains as we head into that Friday morning. Still seeing more of that snow out toward the Rockies as well. Maybe a little bit of mix across Utah, but still looking at this large low pressure system over the Pacific. This will eventually make its way into the Pacific, the West Coast, and eventually get its way into the Central Plains yet again. So we're still seeing more of that moisture making its way across, and some of it could be falling down as snow again, once again in those northern plains. And hey, check this out. It's a bit of a slow drive in South Dakota. Shocker here. There was a lot of snow. This is the view of one highway patrol officer's vehicles on I-29 in Dual County. I've actually been there. They reported it as windy with low visibility and icy roads. You can see that easily right there. Definitely want to plan a couple of extra drive times out there in those conditions in South Dakota. Don't go anywhere. I've got more in your forecast coming up.
Now, as we mentioned, cattle markets feeling the impact of the avian flu outbreak. We'll dig into Tuesday's markets coming up next. And later, creating domestic market demand is vital to the future of the soybean industry. We'll see how a new firefighting foam could fan the flames while helping save lives and protecting the environment in the country.
AgDay is brought to you by Germinator Closing Wheels. Germinator steel closing wheels provides a 13 bushel advantage per acre in no-till and a 7 bushel advantage per acre in conventional. Do you have enough room in your bin to switch to the Terminator?
Grains and cattle moving lower on Tuesday with a general risk-off tone spreading across the entire commodity market. AgDay's Michelle Rook digs into the numbers and markets now.
Tuesday's market closes were mostly lower in grain and livestock futures trade. Chuck Shelby with Risk Management Commodities is back with us. Chuck, let's start off with that cattle market. Boy, a collapse in both live and feeder cattle futures. How much of it was the cattle line feed report versus some of these cases of high-path avian influenza we've been hearing about in dairy herds now?
Well, I think mostly it was the bird flu cases that did it, because when we had the report, the market was down, but it came back around. But on Tuesday, the market just couldn't sustain it. And I do believe today, after we think about it a while, I think the market will probably stabilize in the cattle.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, new lows for the move here, but maybe we overreacted. If we didn't, where do we need to hold support here on the charts?
Somewhere in the 179 area, I think that would be a good support area. We might dip a little bit below 180, but I think that would be pretty solid territory for the market to hold and catch as we move into the next week or two.
Yeah. We also had grains down in pretty much the entire complex. And so what was the risk-off selling there? Was it farmer selling, technical selling, or what?
Well, I think there's a combination of things. The market had a good run. I think producers rewarded this rally after the lows that we made in February. I know they understand the importance of the report coming up, so I think they laid off some risk here as they move towards that report. And I think producers were, justified in getting some kind of rally to reward and sell some grain here ahead of the report.
We are looking at a lot of possible volatility as we head into not only the reports, but end of month and end of quarter, aren't we?
Yeah, it's one of those reports that you kind of dread as a market advisor, because you got so much information. You got the funds involved in these markets big time. It's the end of quarter. They like to move around at end of quarters. We also are really uncertain over where the acreages are. That's going to be important. And then got close to grain stocks.
Chuck, do you think that the Baltimore port closure also maybe impacted the grains, at least psychologically?
I think that was a negative that was in all these markets today. The uncertainty, it's a big time event. It's going to have impacts on the U.S. economy as we move forward.
Thanks so much, Chuck Shelby with Risk Management Commodities. We'll have more AgDay coming up.
Yeah, this past week we have seen a lot of snow falling across a good portion of the western and central parts of the U.S. You can see the snow depth. A lot of places seeing close to a foot. You can see places just to the west of Omaha we're seeing that 1 foot of that snow depth, toward Minneapolis as well, even towards Wisconsin. But a lot of places in the Rockies still seeing several feet of snow. They'll hope to keep that skiing season coming up a couple more weeks before the temperatures start rising over the next couple of days. Spring is getting pretty close. We're still watching for more of that snowfall making its way out of our areas we head throughout the rest of our Thursday. Continuing to see that more of the disturbance we were talking about earlier from the Pacific Northwest. This will continue its way across most of the western U.S. in the form of that snowfall. Could still see some more precipitation as well. Remember, this right up here is your snowfall, counted as that precipitation. A couple more of these raindrops across parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. And then as you look, that last remnant of the system that moved across the U.S. gave a couple wind gusts out towards Chicago, starting to see some of the heavier rainfall across the eastern seaboard. So they're going to be expecting again another couple inches of rain moving in as we get into our late week, entering into your weekend. So more rainfall. It is springtime after all, and I know a lot of you have been waiting for those temperatures to really start getting above freezing, and the jet stream is trying to make it a little bit more difficult for some of us. You can see this low pressure system making its way out for that Thursday. But again, like we've been talking about, we're already eyeing this next one. It's going to be detaching itself from the main flow, continue to move its way across as we get into our weekend and next work week. This is going to make it pretty cool across all these areas in yellow, but already seeing another ridge developing. Now this right here will pose some much warmer air in this area of higher pressure. Also could see across parts of the southeast, seeing much nicer conditions. Again, also quite warm out there, with a lot of those conditions staying both warm and pretty pleasant for some of us, especially during this springtime. Alpena, Michigan, cloudy, high 40 degrees, a little cool out there. Sandpoint, Idaho, looking at possibility of some rain, high around 45 degrees. And finally, Quonset, Rhode Island. Cloudy once again, high a little warmer, mid-50s.
California's Proposition 12 is already having a financial impact on both pork prices and sales. According to information compiled by economists with USDA, prices have seen an average 20% increase in the state since before July 1st of last year, when the initiative was partially implemented, with loin prices averaging 41% higher than before Prop 12 went into effect, seen here in blue. Pork not covered by the initiative has not seen a significant increase. Now, economists also pointed out California's share of fresh pork consumption has declined significantly, which you can see here in yellow. The National Pork Producers Council saying if producers want to continue selling products into the large California market, they would need to retrofit existing barns or build new ones to account for the law's sow housing changes. It says that's a cost many can't afford given the $30 per market hog average loss that producers saw last year. USDA is revising its outlook for food prices this year, calling for lower increases compared to what it previously thought. The Consumer Price Index for all food is now projected to rise by 2.5% this year. That's down from the previous forecast of 2.9%. Grocery store prices are expected to rise by 1.6%, consistent with the February outlook, while food at restaurants is expected to rise 4.1%, down slightly from an earlier 5% prediction. Now, USDA sees a decrease in pork prices by 1.6% compared to a year ago. If the forecast holds true, pork would be the only food category to see price declines for 2 consecutive years. Now, we know the ag industry is always looking for new demand. Up next, what a new soy-based firefighting foam could mean for farmers in the country. This week, the United Soybean Board announced the first and only soy-based fire suppressant had been certified safe for sale. But what do firefighters think about the new product? AgDay's Michelle Rook was on hand in Dalton, Georgia for the test run.
Firefighters from across the country participated in a fire demonstration here at the Dalton, Georgia Fire Department to look at the effectiveness of a new soy-based fire suppressant. A farm-to-fire demo allowed firefighters to see firsthand how soy foam performed with different types of fires and at 1 to 3% concentrations. That included farmer and firefighter Jeff King of Kentucky.
The knockdown ability to knock down the fire, we weren't able to relight it, which was very impressive.
South Dakota's Andy Weiser also tested the product and is excited that it's less corrosive than conventional foams.
I have faith that it should keep our equipment in better quality versus the trouble we were having with the current products.
Mark Krieger also farms and is on the volunteer fire department in Pittsburgh, New York. He says he's excited about growing the soybeans that make this a biodegradable product.
Like 180 days, it's completely gone, and within 18 days, a lot of it is broke down, whereas some of the chemicals they use in the foam today they last forever.
That also means the foam won't contaminate the water supply.
Being environmental friendly, it's going to be awesome. If it runs off into the storm drains and runs out, you ain't got to worry about it.
Soy foam is also a safer alternative for firefighters like Mike McCraney because it's free of PFAS.
Just gives us a safer alternative to use versus some of the other ones that are on the market that are, have fluorines in them, or some of them could be being highly carcinogenic.
And so he and other firemen are anxious to recommend it for use.
We're going to, at my department at home, we're going to swap out all of our foam and go to the soy-based foam.
Farmers attending the farm to fire demonstration say it's exciting to find a new use, especially for soybean meal.
Especially with all the new crush plants going on, there could possibly be a surplus of soybean meal, and that's one thing that this soy-based firefighting foam is using soybean meal in the process, or soybean flour.
And he and other farmers are proud to grow soybeans for this and other bio-based products that are more sustainable.
Being that I'm a volunteer firefighter, it's kind of nice to know something that I grow is being used on the fire ground.
Soy foam, a product that goes from farm to fire. In Dalton, Georgia, I'm Michelle Rook reporting for AgDay.
All right, thanks, Michelle, and that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day on Farm Country.